So I will kick us off and then I'll go to a roving mic, and my first question is for Senator Birmingham. I'm going to take a slightly different tact, and my question is about the goal number 6, which talks about the strategy enhancing mobility. And one of the things that hasn't been touched on today is the impact that the recent free trade agreements, in particular China, may have on this debate. So, Senator Birmingham, could you talk about your views on how the free trade agreements might enhance the goal for mobility?
Well, thanks. It's a very important question. As I noted in my concluding remarks, we've recently handed down Australia's first national strategy for international education to seek to continue to maximise the potential benefits to Australia of international students coming and studying here, and of course the benefits that creates within our region and for our trading partners. Importantly, our free trade agreements all seek to embed within them if you like, and encouragement for study with rights within Australia for students from those other nations, and to take steps forward. And importantly, the China agreement has some very particular benchmarks that we hope China and expect China will meet to provide greater opportunity and ease for Chinese students to identify approved providers that they can study with within Australia. That's something that we will continue to work upon, but we should also, if I can reflect slightly more broadly there, recognise that the changing mediums through which higher education are delivered means that over time our domestic students will equally have more choices around the world as to where they go and how they study and how they access higher education, just as we benefit in Australia from having institutions of high repute, a destination that is very attractive to come and study in, a way of life, a language that is spoken, all of which make us an attractive destination to come to. We shouldn't ignore the fact that increasingly I expect the competition will not just be for the international student, but that our institutions will all need to make sure they're focusing on maintaining and attracting their share of the domestic student as well.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to open it up for questions. Please raise your hand.
Hi, my question's for the 3 VCs and the Chief of TAFE. In the paper from the Senator, the moving forward in the higher education sector, it's sort of related to the funding that affects universities and the students entering that, and then dealing with the existing help debt, which is increasing. Do the universities see that the suggestion of lowering the threshold or any measures about the existing help debt, I guess, do they care about that? Or are they more caring about what affects the university's day-to-day? And, you know, I guess a Bachelor of Business student, is that going to prevent them from coming to university if they have to repay their debt at $30,000 or $55,000?
I mean, look, I think it's a really important question for our graduates. The rate of repayment already is relatively high. I think it runs to about another 10% effectively of income being withheld when people are starting out on their, fairly early in their careers, at a fairly early stage in their careers, and so it's a significant impost at an early time in people's lives. So yes, of course, I think that it's extremely important that we have an affordable system. We have to have an affordable system for the nation in terms of what it costs the taxpayer, but it also has to be a manageable cost to the graduate. If we create a system where our graduates are prevented from being attracted to higher education, then I think then we just have losers all around. What's interesting is that in the experience of a major increase in fees in the United Kingdom a few years ago, where fees were trebled from one year to the next for the student, the actual impost on the impact on school leavers was almost nil. And so I think that the school leaver population effectively looked at this as some debt that's out there in the Never Never Land, and effectively it's something that they'll deal with at some point in the future. So it didn't put them off. That doesn't mean it then doesn't have a substantial impact when the Never Never comes to call. What that fee increase really did do was it really had an impact on the non-school leaver student population or potential student population, the ones who maybe already were working, maybe already had a mortgage, maybe had kids, whatever other costs they might have had in their lives, but certainly they understood the cost of money, and I think they fled the system. So I think we do have to find a model that is perceived, I think, by the potential students to be fair and to be reasonable.
I'm not a fan of dropping the threshold.
Even if the threshold is dropped to 42,000, it remains more generous than in most of the other countries that have this scheme. And I just think, you know, on the other side of this is the taxpayer, and I don't hear from any politician or any of the taxpayer groups who are in favour of not dealing with this massive debt. And, you know, that's not helpful to us.
I'd just say, as somebody who could only have gone to university as a result of paying no fees, I'm totally opposed to the idea that we have a tax on education upfront which affects students' ability to gain access and equity, and that is why the TAFE system offers a refuge for many of those students who can't get into high debt fee areas.
Perhaps if I can just add to all of that, we are absolutely committed to firstly making sure there are no upfront fee barriers for students going to university. That's number one criteria. Number two, we're committed to making sure that the HELP scheme, the old HEX scheme, remains one of the most generous in the world. That any of the changes we make will preserve the fact that students don't pay up front, they're paying interest, CPI interest only on their debt, and that it's a good wage when they start to repay. The debate may sit around what that good wage is, then how it's repaid, and indeed one of the other ideas we've mooted is if a student reaches a high income level sooner, perhaps they should repay a bit more from that high income level sooner. The taxpayer wears a burden each and every year that debt is not repaid because, of course, it is only indexed at the CPI, whereas the cost to government, the cost to the taxpayer of holding that debt, is more than the CPI. So the quicker we can get debts repaid, the more sustainable the scheme becomes, but in absolutely no way do we want to see it become a disincentive to go to university. That's why we'll preserve that heartfelt commitment to zero upfront fees and to making sure that it is one of the most generous schemes in the world.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham, and I'm afraid I am going to have to call it to a close, but obviously a fantastic question and response to close on. I'd like to invite the President for CEDA's State Advisory Board, Miriam Silver, to come forward and give the vote of thanks to our panel today.